Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar about the state role in public transportation, focusing on the question, is transit an economic driver? I am Art Gazzetti, Vice President for Policy and Mobility at the American Public Transportation Association. I am honored to serve as moderator for today's discussion. We thank the Council of State Governments for hosting the webinar. APTA is proud to team up with you. Much appreciation to Joe Shiowitz for his ideas and partnership along the way. Joe works particularly with the Eastern Regional Conference, the 11 states between Maryland and Maine. While we're speaking today with Northeastern states, the discussion is certainly relevant to all regions. Joe, we were impressed by the mission statement, and I would like to quickly read it. The Council of State Governments is a nonpartisan community of the states committed to connecting, informing, inspiring, and empowering public servants in all three branches of state governments to put the best ideas and solutions into practice. Love it. Public transportation has transitioned to a new post-pandemic pattern. Ridership has stabilized around new commute and non-commute patterns. Fiscal outlooks remain a challenge as new strategies are now under consideration to keep transit operating efficiently. Capital projects got a bump up from the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but future growth prospects for many transit systems are being undermined by a backlog of state of good repair needs and the rising costs of critical labor, materials, and construction costs. Today's conversation is designed to be interactive, informative, and high energy. Among the questions to be addressed are: one, what should state legislatures be considering as they address the funding gaps facing transit agencies in their states? Two, how have operational changes since the pandemic provided a new context for public transportation? And three, what economic returns do transportation investments provide amid this evolving paradigm? Today's discussions will include the following distinguished panelists, a very brief introduction. Maryland State Senator Corey McCray represents the 45th District in Northeast Baltimore City. Among his many positions he holds, Senator McCray serves as Deputy Majority Whip, Chair of the Senate Public Safety, Transportation, and Environmental Committee, and Chair of the Senate Transit Caucus in Maryland. Secretary Akbar Hossain serves as Secretary of Policy and Planning for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In that role, Secretary Hossain focuses on advancing Governor Josh Shapiro's policy agenda. Angel Donahue Rodriguez is Assistant General Manager for External Affairs at the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. And stepping in for Holly Arnold is Kate Sylvester. Kate serves as Chief Program Delivery Officer at the Maryland Transit Administration, part of the Maryland Department of Transportation. We begin by asking each panelist to respond to this opening question. Does public transit generate enough social and economic benefits to justify increased investments amid ridership and continuing ridership transformation, continuing competition with roads and bridges for funding? I'd like to pose that to all of you. Who would like to go first?
Happy to go. Go ahead, Senator.
I'm gonna jump in. I'll be very quick. Art, first, just thank you for this opportunity. And CSG, thank you for this opportunity. I just lean in and say, as a son of Baltimore who has caught public transit to school, to work, to recreation, it's no way that we do this without, from an economic driver standpoint. These are the folks that's working in our healthcare institutions. And I'll lean in with this piece of it. In 2021, I got to work on the Transportation Safety Investment Act. And this was one of the unique opportunities where you saw labor in our environment, young, old, employee, employer, so many folks collectively coming together to say that we need a strong public transit system. So to your question, we cannot do without it. The risks are too large.
Secretary.
Yeah, and to follow up on what the senator said, in Pennsylvania specifically, the answer is absolutely yes, right? If you're just looking at the numbers, and I'm a big numbers guy here in our policy shop, we did a study at our Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, PennDOT, about 2 years ago, and that study revealed that public transportation's impact on Pennsylvania, just public transportation's impact was over $5 billion. And when you think about our economy, the budget that we just passed that the governor signed last week is about a $50 billion budget, right? So an annual impact of around $5 billion. Public transportation here in Pennsylvania supports over almost about 40,000 jobs and creates about $2 billion worth of just employee salaries, right? That's huge in Pennsylvania. And in fact, as a lot of you may be aware, we've had a big fight here in Pennsylvania around how do we fund public transportation, specifically for our Southeastern public transportation service, SEPTA. And a study revealed that the cuts that SEPTA was envisioning, if the state did not step in, would have reduced property values in certain areas by $20 billion, right? So numbers alone just speak to the importance of public transportation in addition to the real life realities that the senator had mentioned earlier.
Angel or Kate, anything to add? Mute. Angel.
Apologize about that. Thank you for hosting us today. Much appreciated. Yeah, I think the answer to that is absolutely that transit is as an economic driver, and the ability that it has to create freedom for people to be able to access jobs, to be able to go to the healthcare appointments. That has that translates into a massive economic impact around communities that benefit from transit and that have it. We've had two major transportation projects in the last several years here in the Commonwealth that have increased access to transportation. One where for the first time in over 65 years, we're providing commuter rail service to 25 communities in our southeastern part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That was a $1.2 billion project. And then that just opened up earlier this year. And we're already starting to see the economic impacts of that as it translates to increased property value, to job opportunities, into leisurely travel, which is something that's been happening a lot more frequently. And then the other project is our Greenland Extension project, which was about a $2.8 billion project that stretched through one of the most densely populated areas in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And what that ended up doing was it created a ton of jobs as it related to biosciences and local businesses and the benefits that came from that. So yes, transportation is an economic driver and a major one at that.
Well, thank you. I'll jump in here to round it out. Agreeing with everything that everyone has said, I just add the affordability piece. I don't think we can overstate how important it is for so many people across our communities to have an affordable means of transportation and the opportunities that gives them to spend their money on the other priorities they have in their lives. And then school transportation is also a key piece of what we provide at the Maryland Transit Administration. And similarly, by the numbers, there's the community benefits, really the human side of what we do that is so important, and I think drives a lot of us to understand the importance of this. But then by the numbers too, we look at the jobs output and the economic output, and it's very easy to see and to prove out that we have an economic multiplier effect with every dollar that we invest in public transit, whether it's on the operating side or the capital side. Both are financially good investments in addition to the social benefits that we've all talked about.
And Kate, our data at Aptus says 5 to 1. $1 invested brings $5 back through access, through productivity. You mentioned affordability. Let's underscore that. And the benefits are on both the public side and the private side. So interesting. I want to direct a question to Senator McCray. in the legislature in Maryland, is there a consensus, and where are battles regarding transit priorities? As chair of the Transit Caucus, how do you, how do you advance the transit agenda amidst competing priorities?
Yep. I think on a consensus piece of it, I think that we know that the system is broken. We know that we have an aging infrastructure. We know that our buses, our rail need to be safe and need to be reliable for not just our young people, our seniors, folks that's trying to get to work. I'm going to lean in where Mr. Secretary talked about where the consensus doesn't exist is a lot of times on the funding mechanism. I'm just proud to say that this year during session, where our values and our principles took the front stage, where we had to figure out what would those funding mechanisms look like. And what you'll find is that we had to raise the price for emissions. We did our vehicle registration a little bit different. And those that are speeding in our jurisdictions, you'll find that there's an increased cost to make sure that we can benefit public transit and just our transportation trust fund in general. But I want to lean in on something that Chief Sylvester stated. And she talked about our young people, the greatest gifts that we've been given. And I tell you, I'm a son of Baltimore, but more importantly, I can remember catching a bus to school. I got 4 children. I got a Kennedy, Reagan, CJ, and Bryson, 18, 16, 11, and 10. And 2 of them catch our public transportation to school. In the state of Maryland, we are making significant investments to our education system, over a couple $2 billion. And I asked the question, especially to my colleagues, we're making this investment in education, but if we do not get the transit component right, so if the bus comes late or does not come at all, then we're doing a disservice to future generations that are simply trying to get their foundational outcome of education, which is what we say shift and change trajectories in neighborhoods.
Thank you, Senator McCray. I'm going to stay in Maryland and direct a question to Kate. Kate, in Maryland, are you finding in MTA, are you finding opportunities to optimize routes, implement other strategies, efficiencies, in response to the times? There's changing commute patterns, et cetera. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, adapting to changing travel patterns is an ongoing part of our work, made more difficult and complex with COVID and the changes to travel patterns that we've all kind of watched. What we're seeing is that while our overall ridership is still down somewhat from pre-pandemic, it's continuing to grow and it's very uneven. So we have plenty of routes where we're exceeding pre-pandemic ridership and we're trying to direct more resources there to deal with crowding. We see the Tuesday to Thursday work week is really very distinct, strong ridership, where Monday and Friday are staying a little bit lower. We also see high demand on weekends, proportionately more so than pre-pandemic. So definitely some significant adjustments. On core service, we try to direct resources to where we see growth, but we want to make sure that we're not cutting down those routes that are slower to recover to a point where they stop being useful to the people who are using them and who are needing them and to those who might come back to them. So it's a really tricky balancing act. On commuter bus side, that is one area where we unfortunately had to make some reductions to service last year. And we were able to go through a very deliberative process. Those riders are very engaged and talk to us a lot about their needs. And so through that process, we were able to consolidate some routes that were along similar routes where these folks are people who are driving to a park and ride stop. So they have a little bit more choice and ability to make some modifications to their routes. So on that service in particular, we have been able to make some changes that was an overall reduction in service to bring it a little bit closer to where our ridership is today without seeing really negative impacts on our riders. And in fact, our ridership has continued to grow on that commuter bus side. On the core service, the really heavy hauling core bus network, it's a lot more challenging because there's just so many more trips to meet. And we really need to retain that base level of service for everybody on all the different routes that are continuing to ride. And, just be really mindful of the impacts we're having as we're trying to balance our resources.
Thank you, Kate. Question for Secretary Hossain. What are some of the revenue streams that Pennsylvania is considering? And how do you balance the investment in transit with roads, bridges, make the whole system work together?
Yeah, I mean that's the billion-dollar question. I guess this whole panel is trying to figure out is that balance, right? And that balance is especially critical here in Pennsylvania when you have such a big state that has very diverse folks and very diverse infrastructures all across Pennsylvania. I will say we have 67 counties here in Pennsylvania, and all 67 counties in some way have some form of public transportation. Pennsylvania is also unique in the sense that we have a motor license fund. However, the funding and the money that's within that motor license fund is restricted only to roads and bridges. So we can't use the motor license fund to address public transportation based on our state constitution. So when individuals go out there, they pay they get gas, they pay a certain percentage of a gas tax. We can only use that funding specifically for roads and bridges. And so what we have done is take about 7% or so, I'm rounding here, of our general taxes that come in through our 6% sales tax here in Pennsylvania, and we put that towards public transportation funding altogether. In terms of new revenue, what we're considering and what the governor has proposed in this past budget, we have been unsuccessful, but we're continuing to try to figure out how best to do this, is three different things we have proposed for new funding. One is the governor had proposed about a 1.75% increase within that 7%, which equals around $290 or so million in addition to what has been coming in public transportation to help our various different public transport agencies across Pennsylvania. There have been differences of opinion in the legislature. So Pennsylvania, I believe, based on the two other states here who have joined me, Pennsylvania is one of the few states in the entire country with a divided legislature. So anything that we get done here has to be approved by both a Republican controlled Senate and a Democratic controlled House. In a place like Pennsylvania, that proves difficult as we try to figure out how do we address our roads and bridges and how do we address our public transportation. So, one of the big things that we're considering is increasing the amount of money that already comes in. And the governor had proposed an increase of 1.75%, about $290 million. The second thing we have proposed is, unlike my two other states here, we don't have legalized cannabis here in Pennsylvania for adult use. So we have asked to, for the last 3 years, the governor has proposed legalizing marijuana here in Pennsylvania, and that continues to be a discussion. Obviously, we did not connect the revenue that's coming in from legalizing cannabis to go directly to public transportation, but any increase in our general fund will obviously be an increased funding discussion on where those opportunities lie. And then the third thing, I'm unsure about the actual status of this in the other two states, but legalizing skill games here in Pennsylvania. Those are those slot machines or different type of games you see in gas stations or on highways, in different VFWs. Those are not regulated here in Pennsylvania. So what we have suggested is to regulate those and then tax, the income that's coming in to help address both the issues around skill games, but also bring in more revenue to the state. So in a time when, obviously costs are high for a lot of folks, we're trying to figure out how to do this in an effective way to address, some of our budget funding issues that are coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Hal, I'd like to turn the conversation to dedicated and predictable funds. And what are the benefits that come with dedicated and predictable revenue versus, otherwise?
Yeah.
And what makes that so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. What makes it so important is it provides, at the end of the day, our goal is to provide as much safe and reliable service to our riders every single day and to maximize the to maximize the benefits to the taxpayers of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have a penny dedicated out of every sales tax that's dedicated to the to the MBTA specifically. So other parts of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that don't necessarily ride the T, but have the benefits from an economic development perspective, whether it's a plant that's manufacturing or rail cars or whatever it may be. We want to make sure that we're maximizing those benefits for taxpayers and riders. But how do we give back time to people? That's what becomes predictable for folks. How do we give that time back to our riders every single day so that they can get to their appointment on time? And that translates into real economic input. For example, when we did our TIP program, our track improvement program last year, we gave back a day 2.5 million minutes a day to our riders. That's less time, that's less congestion, that's ability to be able to spend more time with your kids, be able to get back in time, to be able to get to class. And that translated to about $1 million in economic input on a daily basis. And so when you have that predictability in funds, it creates your ability to be able to invest in your workforce. That investment in your workforce translates into greater skill sets that allow you to be able to take some things in-house, and it creates efficiencies in the long run. It creates the ability to be able to make long-term investments that generate economic input and output for folks in our region, whether it's transit-oriented development or benefits for downtowns for the many of the commuter rail or stations that we have through our 176 cities and towns that are in our network. So that predictability in funds allows you to be able to plan ahead, give back time to riders, and be able to make budget efficiencies and invest in your workforce so that you have a better and more efficient transportation system.
No doubt about it. There are huge benefits there. My long career has been in public transportation, and I have seen the benefit. Anyone else care to comment on that? The importance of dedicated, predictable funds you can count on to plan and manage.
I'll jump in on that one. It's actually one of my favorite topics to talk about because the inefficiency that we see with a lack of stability just guts me. You know, that we have such limited dollars available and to deliver the services, to maintain the infrastructure, to provide that good public service that, you know, everyone here in our team is trying to provide. And the inefficiency that comes into play when we are in stop-start cycles, whether it's service or whether it's capital investment, you start down that path, you spend a bunch of money working on a project, and then you got to put it on a shelf for a while. There is so much lost in that. And that is a loss to the, you know, those are public resources that we're using that we're not being good stewards of when we have these cycles. What we need to do, what we want to do, is to be able to start, carry it through, finish it, and deliver it, and have that steady, like, reliable service that folks can depend on, they can build their lives around, they can know what their travel time is going to be. That's how we get the efficient use out of it. So I can't underscore enough how strongly I feel about the importance of stability to delivering on that investment that people are making in public transit, and just showing that it is a good investment, using our dollars efficiently, and ultimately really delivering for the people that we're all here for.
Yeah, and I think what Kate and Angel were, essentially saying is that there's also an element of public trust here that we kind of lose as we, go away from stability to this randomness of the political process that unfortunately the senator and I know too well. The reality is, as we were, at least here in Pennsylvania, as we're talking about increasing funding for public transportation, oftentimes our agencies, the folks in the positions that Kate and Angel are in, they have to inform the public of the consequences of what would happen if we if government doesn't act in a way that's like helpful, right? Like if we don't increase funding, we have to cut X services, we have to get rid of like these certain lines. And as the public hears this out loud, and there becomes an unfortunate reality of them thinking like, do I trust that my train is going to show up on time, right? Heck, in Philadelphia, 50,000 students use public transportation to go to school. And I'm sure there's a similar reality in your spaces as well. And like that is a huge issue we need to address, right? Like, if all of a sudden a random route is canceled, like that doesn't only impact that mother or father who's trying to go to work, it also impacts like all of these school-age children who are just trying to get to school to learn. So I think that predictability is incredibly important. But on top of it, the longer we take to address these public transportation issues, the harder it is to win back public trust, who almost always like they want to have a reliable system, right? They just want something, they want to be able to go there and just like get on and go, right? Like so I think the more we can do towards ensuring that public trust, the better we will be in the long term.
I want to bring up the question of suburban and rural communities. And I'm going to ask the question, and please, if you have a good answer, just jump right in, because I'd like anyone with a perspective to address it. But what about we're talking about the economic return here. Is that a different answer in rural and suburb communities? How do we make the case? How do you make the case in economic return? How is transit important to suburbs and rural?
I think all projects matter, right? That a $1.1 billion project in an inner core community doesn't mean this is not just as important for a $10 million project in a particular small rural area, right? And that interconnectedness between the bridges that are there, the culverts, and how that impacts whether those buses that are the local transit and those buses that run through those bridges, or whether they're able to get to where they need to go. So I would say there's an interconnectedness between that end of rural communities, and those projects. They matter both from a political standpoint, right? Because it's about regional equity. That's something we hear a lot from our legislature, a lot. So from a regional equity perspective, the projects matter just as much and are just as impactful in our rural communities, and we have many of them in our system as the inner core of our network.
I'm a double down on that statement. I think, as stated, there's a mistake when we try to put the divide between urban, rural, suburban. And I think that we all have hospitals. I think that we all have community colleges. We all have supermarkets, grocers that we're trying our best to get to. And that's the point that we should just kind of lean in on. And I think that we all have big employers, whether you're in rural, urban, or suburban. And those employers are trying to figure out how to get our workers to warehouses, to hospitals, to things of that nature, especially when they're struggling to hire and trying to put these puzzles together. So I think that as we approach it, at least as I approach it, I can speak for myself. I'm always trying to figure out how, from an equity standpoint, are we doing things responsibly? And whether you're in the DC region, whether you're in Eastern Shore, Maryland, whether you're in Western Maryland, or whether you're in the Baltimore region, how do we make sure that pot looks equitable and thinking about all folks that found themselves in that situation?
Good points made. APTA did a report a few years ago that, while there may not be as many people using public transportation in rural areas, those that do, it's a lifeline. It is absolutely critical to them. And when you're using it in rural areas, you need it to get to your medical and whatnot. So it is a critical service. Absolutely. I want to direct a question to Kate, but inviting everyone to respond. And it's a broad question because it has to do with the federal, state, local partnership that supports public transportation. I call it a three-legged stool. All three legs need to be strong. Without any one of those legs, you're going to fall. So any comment on the federal, state, local partnership? What do you like about it? How might we enhance it? How might we fix it? Any comments? Open to everyone.
That is a very broad question. I think fundamentally it makes a lot of sense with the benefits that we get from public transit for it to be supported by all levels of government. There's different types of benefits that accrue at scale and then in local communities. There's a real important benefit to, I think, the consistency and stability across the industry, across the country that comes with having a federal framework for it too, which I think is important to keep in mind. I think in terms of how do we improve it, what would I like to see from it? I think that also means that public transit is a highly regulatory environment. We have regulations coming into with the funding, regulations come from every level of government, and that brings challenges with it, and different value propositions, different goals, different ways of overseeing the different funding sources that we have. And I think we just need to keep our eye on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. To the point earlier about public trust, like that, I think needs to be a bit of a North Star for us. So I think we already talked about stability. You heard that. I feel very strongly about that. I think stability and funding is critical, and a focus on state of good repair first. That, again, being good stewards of the dollars that we have, we need to resist the incentives that will push to wait till something breaks to invest in it. That's not the most efficient way to manage the dollars that we have. So we need to make sure that the funding incentives don't encourage that. We need to deliver faster. We need to be able to move from starting a project to finishing a project faster than we do today. And funding stability is a big piece of that, but various types of oversight and things like that, we really need to look at it seriously and make sure that we are making it possible to have an efficient delivery of the services that we're trying to get out on the street. Like, we need to stay focused on that. And then the other thing that comes to mind is the focus on safety. I think there's been an increasing federal focus on safety in public transit recently, which I think is good and needed. Safety needs to be at the top of the list, whether that's, training, fatigue management, mental health, infrastructure inspections. There's all different ways that we approach safety as an industry, and we need to keep getting better at it. But we need to make sure that it really is outcome driven, that we're creating safety cultures in our agencies and letting people make good choices when it comes to safety, and not getting too focused on just a regulatory environment. And we also need to make sure that when we're putting new limitations and focuses on employment that are safety driven, that there's not a negative impact on the employees, that it shouldn't cost them out of their pocketbook to have a safe work environment. Like, that's not a good outcome, and that's not going to give them the incentive to be part of a safety culture that we want to see. So those are some things, some areas that I think we need to make sure we stay outcome focused in this policy and funding environment that comes from all three levels of government.
I would expand on that about the public trust. And I think I go even a step further in saying part of building the public trust is, to your point, Kate, is delivering on projects and seeing tangible results, right? We throw these numbers around, the $1 billion here, the $100 million here, and what oftentimes isn't seen, and it's real, and that's incumbent upon us to be able to figure out ways to be innovative about it, is how do we show the public that every dollar that we invest has an economic connection to them and direct benefit to them, right? So what is it that they see? What is it that they feel? For us, we've gone to great lengths to be able to do that. So the thing that I think is really important is how do we give tools to our transit agencies and to administrators to be able to deliver those tangible things. And I think looking at project delivery methods that are innovative and encourage cross agency coordination, whether it's job order contracting reform or procurement reform as it relates to design building. How do you get things faster? How do you get them quicker and out the door in a on time and on budget? And being innovative in that manner. Those are the things. How do you give transit agencies the tools needed to deliver those projects on a more cost-effective basis? And oftentimes, to Kate's point, I think regulations can be cumbersome. And so where are those areas that we can all agree on that would benefit on delivering those projects on a much quicker timetable to help rebuild that public trust that they can see and feel that economic impact and benefit that we provide?
Good material from both of you. Question for both Secretary Hossain and Senator McCray. Flexible funding has been in the news. Of course, flexible funding is the ability to use your federal surface transportation funds according to your state priorities, state and regional priorities. If it's, transit money going to roads money going to transit, whatever your priority is, you're allowed to do it. How do your states consider the use of flexible surface transportation funds? Comment on the concept of flexibility generally, and what considerations go into the decisions you make along those lines. I know, by the way, Senator McCray, I go way back to the initial interstate transfer program, and Maryland was a pioneer in using, because it was their priority to use interstate money for local transit needs. But question to the two of you, perhaps Senator McCray, you can go first on flexible funding and the considerations in the use of it.
Yep. First, when I think about like how we do it in Maryland, we have our 6-year CTP where we're talking about roads, bridges, public transportation, and what that vision actually looks like from a long-term standpoint. And when I think of that, when we look at some of the places where I have challenges, and then I'm gonna talk to you about what we do from a solution standpoint. My challenge may come in when I see a decrease in what the CTP outlook look like over that 6-year period in one specific area, and it may not look equitable. Or if I see monies that may be used from our general fund versus our transportation fund in one specific area, but not boosting up other specific areas. Where we figure out from a solution standpoint is making the hard choices about what does revenue generation look like for a balance of our roads, our bridges, but more importantly, also our public transportation. And what does our state of good repair? My job is not just to fight for the Baltimore state of good repair, but think it through, like, how do we finish projects like the Purple Line? How do we make sure that other projects are successfully there? And I talked about some of the hard choices that we had to make in the legislature this past year to make sure that we can fulfill that obligation to Marylanders.
Thank you, Secretary.
Yeah, and in Pennsylvania, we had a real life example as early as last year. So in November of 2024, we were informed by SEPTA that they would have to actually increase costs by 21% if something was not done to help address the financial windfall that they were going to face. And the governor had to figure out how best to address the situation, and flexing was part of that discussion, right? And it's a difficult conversation to have, because at one point you have to understand that there's available funding from the federal government in order to address or mitigate the current bridge repairs or road repair issues that are at play. And one of the things we had to consider was whether there are certain projects in Pennsylvania, the capital highway projects that were not yet under construction or put out to bid, right? And whether we could use that funding, because they were not under construction, towards assisting SEPTA on in the front. And the governor actually made the decision to put out flex about $153 million to address this issue. But in that process, while we were doing that, we also had to be strategic, because we had to ensure that while state is one element of trying to address, public transportation, so are our local leadership as well, right? So SEPTA itself consists of 5 different counties here in Pennsylvania. And in addition to the governor flexing about $153 million, we also had commitment from all 5 of those counties to increase the funding that they were going to put out as well. So it's a reality that we had to do, but we had to make sure that while we were flexing, the redirected funds actually came from projects that were not yet under construction.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question that it's an unfair question, people, because there's no answer to it, right? But I'm going to raise it because your perspectives would be valuable to the attendees. And that's a question of operating versus capital money. They're two, distinct purposes for it. There's immediate needs for operating funds that are critical, right? It's today's needs, and there are certainly important, critical, longer-term needs to keep our, physical assets in a state of good repair and keep them growing, as our communities grow. Any comments on, again, there's no right answer to it, but your perspective is helpful. How do we deal with this? The need to have a healthy operating budget, but at the same time, make sure there's a healthy capital budget to go with it, and there are competing demands on those funds.
I view it less of a competition, and rather there's a symbiotic relationship between the two and interdependency, right? An example of that is the dollars that you invest in the capital end lead to operational efficiency. So if you put a crossover, for example, in certain parts of our system, or the ability to be able to have the ability to be able to, for our teams to be able to access the right of way where you don't have to have a longer bus bridge that saves you operating dollars, that's a great way or a great example of how these things are interconnected. And so I don't really view, I think they play off of each other. I don't like the idea of having a competition, because I think that they're both integral in the ability to maximize efficiencies if strategically thought out and planned out on how they can play into one another and the benefits that they can have.
We all agree? Let me offer. I said it was an impossible question to answer, but I think the answer is you need funding for both, right? And then the question is resolved, given that. We're talking about funding. We're talking about, of course, economic return. The private sector is a key to that. The private sector benefits. But is there a role? Can we think of a role for the private industry in funding transit? Anything we can think of? Is there an idea, perhaps on the real estate side, perhaps other thoughts? Again, the private sector is a big part of our message, how transit enables them to succeed, in their commerce.
I can lead off on that one. I'm sure others have thoughts on this too.
Not an easy question there either, but it's important to raise. Please, Kate.
I do think that there's a role for the private sector. I think it's very local market specific. So I think ideas around value capture and density bonus when you're near high value public transit investment, for example, can be really useful tools and can really leverage that economic power of public transit in the right market. I think there are some markets and some real estate markets that are really sensitive to not being able to get that development going if we're looking to add additional requirements onto the private sector. That are things that we want to see. So I just think it's you really have to look at the local context to figure out what makes the most sense. I'm also just really mindful of the affordability impacts of trying to leverage investment from the private sector, particularly if it's housing development, things like that, that those folks who are new into the community are supporting public services that are supporting everybody. So, what's the impact of that way of raising revenue? I think those are really sort of broad community questions that need to be looked at really carefully. As a public transit agency representative, I love every idea for raising revenue to help us to meet the funding needs that we have. So, that's my first position always, but I think I just would caution too that we need to really think about all of the impacts. And again, that public trust and that outcome base, thinking through affordability impacts and ultimately how do we stimulate the real estate market that we want to see, that a community is looking to see.
Yeah, I think sustainable funding is obviously the best possible solution here instead of trying to think of how can other folks fill holes that government can't. But I think in Pennsylvania, we had tried an interesting pilot with our PennDOT where it was like a workforce development pilot program with a certain population centers connecting to job centers. So essentially, you have an area where there's a lot of jobs, and the employers in those job centers agreed to fund certain routes in population centers where a lot of their employees were, right? And the pilot program, we're still evaluating whether it was a successful or not, some of the loopholes within the program. But I do think that's an interesting, innovative way to think about what the future looks like. Again, not suggesting here that every state do this, but it was a pilot program here. And as we have more data around, we all have spaces where there are heavy population centers and heavy job centers, and those employers have a benefit in ensuring that their folks are showing up on time, right? Or their folks have reliable public transport. And this was interesting to see that partnership here in Pennsylvania. So looking forward to sharing more data on it as we have that.
Great to hear, Mr. Secretary. Next question, I'm going to ask you for regional perspectives, down home kind of answer. And it's about the historic commitment to infrastructure made through the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's up for reauthorization before the end of next September, 2026. And I'd like to ask each of you, all four of you, to talk about the impact IIJA has had on your respective states and regions. So how has it helped you? Where would we be without it, right? So how is it important to us? How do we need to continue that level of investment? Anyone go first? Mr. Secretary, you're in the middle here, so.
All right, happy to go. Listen, it's been a huge boom for Pennsylvania, the IIJA, and the additional funding that has come to the state to help us kind of rethink through what innovative and additional highway projects we can do. So we had received around $4 billion from through the IIJA for the highway and bridge projects here in Pennsylvania, including $500 million for something called the I-83 South Bridge here in central Pennsylvania, which has been one of our biggest projects in terms of renovation that we needed to do. That addresses both a need for the area, but also a lot of safety concerns for a bridge that is in the brink of a lot of dire issues that we're going to fix with that $500 million. So we're very thankful, and obviously a huge impact of that funding. In addition to that, there's also something called the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, the NEVI program, as we all know it. So Pennsylvania has actually been leading the country when it comes to new stations that have been created as a result of that funding. So we've created over 20 different stations here in Pennsylvania that have done over 30 different charging sessions. And we think that's also a new additional infrastructure that obviously we couldn't have done without the support of the NEVI funding.
Mm-hmm. Senator McCray.
All right, I think that with the IIJA, it just presented an unique opportunity to be able to accelerate some of those more needed projects within the state of Maryland. We've been blessed because of the federal government, the Biden administration because of it, and look forward to kind of building on it. But it was definitely accelerated within the state of Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've done some big things and so much happening in the state of Maryland. Congratulations for all that. And Hal.
For us, the IIJA has been absolutely instrumental in our ability to be able to move some significant projects here at the MBTA. The first one is our Draw 1, North Station Draw 1 Bridge, which received $472 million in funding. That bridge is a $1.1 billion project that provides services to 26 communities north of the city of Boston. It is a lifeline for those communities. We're talking environmental justice communities. We're talking about rural communities. We're talking about suburban communities and urban communities. That's one project to name. And then from an accessibility standpoint, we received two $67 million independent ASAP grant funding. We are going to be upgrading 8 stations on our Green Line, which is the busiest light rail system in the country. And that project is going to bring 8 stations in our Green Line system into making them more accessible. So those projects in those specific programs, I know ASAP was one that was created during the IJA as a new program, but that is a direct investment that is being made and is going to provide critical investments for our community and make them more accessible.
Awesome. Kate, please.
Just building on and agreeing with Senator McCray, IIJA really let us accelerate some really critical investments that have been on the books for decades in some cases. We are a partner with Amtrak in several major Northeast Corridor investments.
Yes.
The state of Maryland's the beneficiary of over $6 billion in grants to support those projects. That's the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, BMP
Yes.
Bridge, Susquehanna River Rail Bridge, and a number of other projects on the Northeast Corridor. That's transformative for Maryland. Those have been decades in the making. We also are the recipient of a $200 million rail vehicle replacement grant that's allowing us to replace our entire fleet of light rail vehicles. That's leveraged quite a bit of state investment. Thank you again, Senator McCray, for supporting that last session. So we're making a really comprehensive reinvestment in our light rail line in Baltimore. And then another thing that's sort of smaller in dollar amount, but really has impact statewide is IIJA allowed us to increase our pass-through grants to all 23 counties around the state of Maryland for their local transit systems for the first time in well over a decade. So each of those local systems is seeing, in some cases, upwards of a 20% increase in their annual grants to support their local operations, which was really overdue. And those needs are still tremendous, but that is really powerful for those small, in some cases, rural systems all throughout the state.
Well, just hearing all of you comment on that, these are projects of national significance that would not happen without that federal, state, local partnership. So great to hear it. That we talk about the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, for example. Talk about those accessibility improvements on the Green Line, and in Pennsylvania, I know my hometown, Pittsburgh, the new busway going through the Hill District and through Oakland up to Squirrel Hill. That's been talked about, Secretary, for 100 years, and it's finally going to happen. So congratulations for all of that. I'd like to underscore the topic. We're all out of time, but I want to mention this affordability issue. It has always been there. Transit has always been an answer to affordability, but I think it's been a little under the radar. We talk about affordable housing. How about affordable transportation? The cost of a vehicle is incredible if you can get by with one less vehicle. Transit is so important to balancing your household budget. So would anyone just like to make any maybe personal or observations as community leaders on the importance of affordability and how transit has a critical role on that?
Sure. I would just say it's about providing people options and the ability to be able to have, again, options and to move freely. That's a justice issue, right? In many respects. And very fortunate through our work with our legislatures that we've made attempts to make our transit system even more affordable here, systems across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Through the ballot initiative that was passed here several years ago, we've been able to dedicate and make all of our regional transit authorities free of charge with more reliable and predictable service. Those investments have also come our way at the MBTA. We've introduced for the first time our low-income fare program, where up to 200% of the federal poverty level, you get a 50% discount on any part of our network. These are tangible things, along with investments in our infrastructure, that have made the system more reliable. And the more reliable our system becomes, the more people that end up taking it, and it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's building upon those types of things.
It's all a system. We have to plan it as a system, manage it as a system, look at it as a system, finance it as a system. And, it works better as a system, capacity wise, right? We're not going to be able to keep building roads. We need a balance of roads and transit to deal with our capacity needs. We're nearing the anyway. We're nearly nearing the end of our time, but I'd like each of you to offer a concluding thought, or I invite you to. Is there anything maybe we didn't touch on you think we should have, or what point would you most like to underscore in our conversation today? Start with Senator McCray.
All right, always got me on the hot seat. First, I just want to say I am blessed to be able to share this panel with Chief Sylvester, Mr. Secretary, our Assistant General Manager. When I reflect back on this conversation, I just say thank you for lifting up for those that need it the most. We talked about schools, we talked about work, we talked about just medication, hospitals, things of that nature for those that need us to amplify the voices. And then I think that something I would just lean in on is like we also bear a responsibility. As I listened to Angel, and he spoke about like the reliability and just getting more people engaged in our transit system. I want to say I like to lift folks when they're doing right, and I kind of challenge them when they need to be pushed. And one of the moments that I want to lift up our MTA system is I can see them trying to draw in people that have been left out of the transit system. So they have the luxury of maybe having one or two cars, but they also understand the responsibility of a clean environment, of making sure that we build into the greater system. And how have they been doing that? I love the idea of just like the bus wrap and making sure that we celebrate diversity with our LGBT community. That is making sure that people take ownership of our public transit system. I love how some of the days like Veterans Day that just recently passed, making sure that we offer riders who are veterans the opportunity to catch our public transit for free. This is how you bring in folks that may not traditionally catch the system, but then it's our job to hold on to them is what I want to say. And I understand that responsibility.
Well stated, Senator. Mr. Secretary, please.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to take too much time here, but I want to just echo everything that the senator said. At the end of the day, as we travel the Commonwealth here in Pennsylvania, what we see is most people who rely on transit, no one's asking for a handout. They're always asking for a hand up. If you're using public transportation to go to your work, if you're using public transportation to go to school, if you're using public transportation to go to your doctors, you're looking to do better. You're trying to help your society in some way. You're trying to help yourself. And we as government should be there to trying to help you along the way.
Thank you. Angel, what do you most want us to know?
Public service matters. That's the crux of it. This is why we do everything we do. Every decision that we make has an impact on the people that we serve on a day-to-day basis. And at the end of the day, that's our guiding star, is how do we make people's lives better? And I think that's what the thing that I would take away from this conversation in this panel.
Kate, you get the last word.
Wow, I'm honored. And it's hard to top all of this, in particular, double down on that public service matters. I absolutely believe that to my core. And I guess the one thing that, I think I'll just add is, we ask our riders, what would you do if public transit wasn't here? And we get overwhelmingly people saying either they wouldn't be able to make the trip, and often that's a work trip, which means that that's a tremendous change to their life, right? They're not able to get to work or school, or they're going to take Uber or Lyft or TNC, and that out-of-pocket expense, people are very clear that that's not something they can bear on a day in and day out basis. So I think the impact that the public transit trip has on people's lives is tremendous. And I think it's a huge responsibility and blessing that we have to be able to try to make it a little bit better with our roles in it.
Awesome. Well, we need to wrap up our discussion today, but not before we thank our panel for the perspectives and insights they shared with us today. We are better informed as a result. I know that a recording of the webinar will be available on the APTA website within a few days. So thank you all for attending, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.